don't expect a big crowd tonight.
I don't see any crowd tonight.
Even if it's on the agenda, it's not
Yeah.
our,
Yeah, that's right. We should be out of here pretty quickly, I would think. That would
famous
be-
last words.
Yeah.
Oh,
So I didn't never get flats, but they stopped putting the Kevlar in this tire, so I tried another frame.
Sorry for the delay.
No worries.
You know if Mohammed's coming, or is he
Commissioner Moman is out of town.
out of town?
Okay. All right, very good.
We'll wait.
All right, if we're ready, I'll go ahead and call to order this meeting of the Albany Planning and Zoning Commission for Wednesday, February 22nd. And I note that all commissioners are present except for Commissioner Moman, who is excused. And I will read the land acknowledgement. The City of Albany recognizes that we occupy the land originally protected by the Confederated Villages of Lishan. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. We acknowledge that the genocide that took place on these lands and must make strides to repay the moral debt that is owed to this indigenous people, specifically the Ohlone tribe. We thank them for their contributions, which have transformed our community and will continue to bring forth growth and unity. The City of Albany commits to sustaining ongoing relationships with the tribe and together build a better future for all that now make this their home. Okay, items 1 and 2 are dispensed with, and we have item 3, ex parte communications. Any ex parte communications to disclose among the commissioners? Nope. None with me either, and so we can move on to item 4, the consent calendar. First item is 4.1, the meeting minutes of the last meeting, I believe, February 8th. And are there any comments or corrections from commissioners? Yes.
I think there was an omission around minute 42, for which I have a transcription, if you like, where I asked about the reduction in population, specifically in Alameda County, 27,300. And you weren't here, but that was lost to Alameda County, which what effect would that have on the requirements by Ag Bag for 1,114 units? And Mr. Barry Miller responded that half the Bay Area cities had objected, but that it would take a legislative action at this point to change the requirements. But I wanted that in the record, so.
Okay. I think we can add that. Yes, staff can add that. Great. Any other comments or?
No, I would just say with that amendment, I move the consent calendar as proposed.
Okay,
Quick question.
yes.
Didn't we already approve this parcel merger?
Tentative.
It was on your agenda last fall, and we pulled it from the agenda, and so no action was taken.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought I saw it.
That's what I recall as well.
But it's exactly what was on the agenda before.
Okay. So we have a motion to move the consent calendar. Do we have a second?
A second.
Okay, and then before we take a vote, I want to see if there's anyone online to comment about this item. If there's anyone who's,
Pull the items.
or pull and comment on the items.
So if anyone on Zoom would like to speak on the consent calendar, please use the raise your hand function. There's no one in the room. no attendees in the room, so I'm not seeing any hands raised.
Okay, there are a few attendees on Zoom then?
I see 4 members.
Okay. All right, great. No hands raised, then we'll bring it back to the commission for a vote, and I'll just do a roll call. I forgot your last name already. Hudson, Commissioner Hudson,
Aye.
Commissioner McLeod,
Aye.
and Commissioner Waddy.
Aye.
And I vote aye as well, and the ayes have it. So that takes care of the consent calendar. Oh, I did actually have a question about the parcel map. I mean, is there any, it's very technical, it's hard to make, hard to understand exactly what was going on. Is there anything of note in, anything that we might want to note from the maps themselves, or really is it just the action of, we voted that the parcel consolidation conforms with the general plan? Is that really just the gist of our work?
That's the gist of your work. The parcels, there are 9 different parcels right now.
Yeah.
And the way the municipal code and the subdivision code work, you have to approve that. If there are that many parcels being merged together, you have to approve them. The project itself has been approved.
Right.
And this ideally would have been done at the same time.
Okay.
But it wasn't. And so
Right.
this is just a
Yeah.
trailing.
No, I guess I was just more curious if there's any peculiarities or any distinctive things that you wanted to point out on the maps, or really the maps are just a technical thing that is not really important to our discussion.
It's a good question, and I think it actually resolves some issues that exist as they are today. The existing parcels are small, and they wouldn't be able to accommodate hardly any sort of development that would otherwise be allowed on San Pablo Avenue.
Yeah.
And so we're, in effect, with your action, able to implement the project.
Yeah.
The kind of project that's been approved by the commission and the council.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, and thank you for your willing to take the question after the vote. So we'll move on to item 5, announcements and communications. Are there any announcements from staff?
I do have one, an important one. Last night, the city council met and took action on adopting the housing element. They approved it unanimously after 2.5, maybe 3 hours of discussion. The primary item of discussion, as it was with the commission, was tenant protections. And in particular, there was a lengthy discussion about the tenant opportunity to purchase provision, TOPA. As it ends up, the council approved keeping the TOPA provision, the TOPA program in the element. One of the city council members was recused, and I think actually it was a 2-2 split between the remaining council members about feelings about that. And in an effort just to kind of wrap it up, one of the council members picked a side in order to just move on with the rest of the action that evening. But I think that will be a program that we'll return to in the next couple of years to really get to the bottom of in particular. The only change that they made to the document is to add in the tenant protection program, it was 5D, a consideration of a local housing voucher program, similar to what sometimes referred to Section 8, which is a national program to explore the feasibility of a local program. So they added a few words about that. It was a new bullet point. Beyond that, it was adopted as you recommended and discussed with your edits that you talked about at your meeting. We sent it to the Department of Housing and Community Development this afternoon, and they have 60 days to get back to us, and it may be sooner, it may be the 60th day. We'll see. When they get back to us, we will let everybody know what the outcome was, and we'll update our webpage. We'll make announcements here at the commission. We'll make announcements to the city council. So that was a big milestone. Hopefully we're close to the finish line, or that was the finish line. We'll see. But it's, yeah, that was the main thing I wanted to report to you.
Yeah, thank you. I listened to the meeting. I didn't know it was going to take all my evening. I listened and I made some comments at council. You accurately described the proceedings. Just to clarify, I know Berkeley's element was rejected. But we were in a different place in the process, right? We actually had not formally submitted. We had submitted the draft, but we had not formally submitted the final. So, there's still a possibility that we'll be rejected, but hopefully not.
They were 3, 4, 5 weeks ahead of us, and the state said they had some things some policies and programs that the state wanted them to work on. So yes, they have a little bit of work. They have to go back to their council and go back to the state. That could happen to us. Hopefully not. We were thorough in response to the comments, but it's a little unpredictable.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Are there any other announcements?
I do have a second one, or a calendar reminder that next week there is a training. And I'm just making sure I get the date right. Thursday, March 2nd, your biannual refresher course on the Brown Act, the open meeting laws and conflict of interest laws and public record laws and procedures and best practices and so forth. The city attorney will be there. Myself and Sue, the city clerk, will be making parts of the presentation. And our city attorney will be there for questions and answers and her part of the presentation. We hope to make it interesting as we can. It's kind of dry material, but encourage you to attend. I know for some of you may have schedule conflicts. It would be worthwhile watching. There are changes in the law that could affect you personally or other members of the commission, and it's good to understand what those are and be prepared as they come up. So that's next Thursday, March 2nd. And I have on my calendar, I can double check. I think it starts at 7, but I'm not sure.
I think it's 6 to 7:30.
It was a 6 to 7? Okay, thank you. Thank you for that clarification. I put everything starts at 7 on my calendar.
At the community center.
Yes, thank you. That too is important. It's at the community center.
Jeff, on that sort of related note, but slightly different, do you have any updates on our Form 700 compliance? Like when, because I don't think I've received an email on when we need to turn those in, or have other people received that? I know I've received it for my day job, but I haven't. They're usually the same April 1 deadline. And usually by now, we've been given like a link. So I was just wondering if you have any insight on that.
I don't. I'll remind the city clerk.
Okay.
I'll remind Ann to get word out to you.
I got mine, and I think the deadline is March 9th,
You may have gotten it as a new member,
maybe. Yeah.
because I think it's usually April 1st.
It's usually within proximity to your first hearing you have to do one, but then annually, I think it's normally April 1.
Yeah. I'll double check with Ann, and either she or I will get back to you tomorrow morning
Thank
with
you.
the details of that.
Do you usually file with NetFile online or paper?
It depends whether it's for my day job or for this one.
Oh, okay. Because I'm a net filer, and I don't know if they send out automated reminders or we depend on the city clerk. Anyway.
I mean, usually I feel like we get a prompt from the city.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the
Yeah,
past,
usually.
you've gotten a prompt from Ann.
Yeah, usually it's from Ann. Okay. Any other announcements, communications from staff or commissioners? If none, then we can move on to the.
You do have a public comment on announcements.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Sorry, in fact, I was going to skip. Is the comment on item 5 or general comment on item 6? We can ask the person who's raising their hand.
Hi there. My question was actually that meeting next Thursday on legal procedure, is that open to the public?
Yes, it is.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay, great. And thank you, Lizzie. Okay, so that was announcements and communications, and let me not skip over item 6, which is public comments. Anyone in the, well, there's no one here, so anyone in the Zoom audience who wishes to make a general public comment for an item not on the agenda can do so now by raising their hand. Any hands? Okay. All right, great. Then we will move on to item 7 now, discussion and possible action on matters related to the following items: 7.1, study session on the local hazard mitigation plan update and general plan safety element update. And I imagine that's, Lizzie, why you're here, is to present on that?
It is.
I'm just here to listen in.
Now she's here to work. I'll do a brief introduction, then turn it over to Lizzie. So the commission has a formal role in particular with respect to the city's housing, general plan, which includes the housing element, sorry, I have housing element in my head, in my brain still. The safety element is a portion of the general plan, and there are a couple of things that are triggering a requirement for the city to update its safety element. So you'll have a formal role in that in the next few months. A lot of the work, we also have on a similar track, and it's not, hasn't yet come together, responsibility to prepare a local hazard mitigation plan. And the local hazard mitigation plan is really a much more detailed document that Lizzie will present in a second. And it is the base document, the detailed document that will ultimately kind of support the higher level safety element of the general plan. So what we wanted to do tonight is give you the details on the local hazard mitigation plan, get your feedback on that. Lizzie will talk through the schedule that we're going to go through in the next few months. And when we come back to talk about this in the future, we'll have the safety element, which will look very familiar. There'll be less detail. It'll look very familiar, and it will hopefully be internally consistent between the two documents that will eventually lead to a general plan amendment later this year. So with that brief introduction, if you don't know Lizzie Karaj, she is our sustainability coordinator for the Community Development Department. She staffs our Climate Action Committee, among many other responsibilities, including managing our waste hauling franchise agreements, many of our sustainability measures. I'm forgetting things, but and certainly this evening, our disaster resilience planning and response. So with that, I'll just turn it over to Lizzie.
Great. Thank you for having me this evening. And I'm excited to share the local hazard mitigation plan with you all. So just for some basic overview, one of the main reasons we want to do a local hazard mitigation plan is so that we are in compliance with the Federal Disaster Mitigation Act of 2000, which requires local governments to have a CalOES and FEMA-approved local hazard mitigation plan, which I'm going to call LHMP just to save my breath, in order to be eligible for hazard mitigation grant program funds. And also Jeff and I are still trying to determine, but we think it also makes us eligible for additional funds if the city is to experience a disaster and has to commit staffing or resources towards response, which we did in COVID-19 and are likely to do in the future. It makes us eligible to seek certain percentages of reimbursement from federal funds. So it's an important tool for that alone, and it's also important for identifying pre-disaster mitigation efforts the city can take in order to reduce risks of hazards that pose a risk to the Albany community. This plan is not to be confused with post-disaster emergency management, which is handled by a different plan, which is also being updated currently, the Emergency Operations Plan. That is being update of that plan is being managed by our city's fire department. The 2023 LHMP, which was attached to your agenda packet, is an adapted version of the original local hazard mitigation plan that the City Council adopted in 2018, and that was approved by CalOES and FEMA also in 2018. This plan builds upon the successes of the previous version and adds new information, as well as restructures the information so that it meets new FEMA guidelines. So the main element of the local hazard mitigation plan is a risk assessment. FEMA explicitly requires that a city conduct a risk assessment to identify all hazards that the community might be prone to and analyze each of those hazards with respect to location, extent, previous occurrence, future probability, and impacts and vulnerability to the community. And based on feedback we received, based on the 2018 LHMP, which included a risk assessment, as well as feedback we received from the Climate Action Committee and the community in this planning process, we have the following hazard listed in the risk assessment. I'll not read all the sub-bullets, those are sub-hazards, but the main hazards identified are earthquakes, public health epidemic, critical infrastructure and utilities failure, flooding, extreme temperatures. So there's a category of severe weather, but that's broken down by extreme temperatures and damaging winds, wildland and urban fire, hazardous air quality, slope failure and landslide, terrorism, and hazardous materials release. These have also been ordered in a ranking exercise by the planning team to reflect the magnitude of risk. That's not to say that one might occur, that an earthquake is going to occur before hazardous materials release, but just that the impact based on ranking done by the planning team put that at the top. As a fun fact, the 2018 plan listed public health epidemic as the least likely to affect the Albany community. So that's why now, this time, it's listed as number 2, since we are still undergoing that hazard. So, and I apologize for the formatting. The safety element of the general plan, as Jeff mentioned, the local hazard mitigation plan update triggers the update of the safety element of the general plan. And the safety element is a vehicle for local hazard mitigation plan implementation. So it will, in effect, be a pared down version of the LHMP. And that will establish policies and programs and provide the legal foundation for amendments to planning and zoning subdivision requirements and also updates to the CIP. So for next steps, we're planning to take the draft, very similar to what you're seeing this evening, to the City Council on March 20th. We're also planning to open up a public comment period for this plan to the general public. We'll post it on our website and share e-notifications and put in the e-news so that members of the public can provide input on the plan and share that before the council meeting. Following council feedback, we plan to submit the draft plan to Cal OES for review. And then after Cal OES review, we'd like to take the plan back to the Climate Action Committee and Planning and Zoning to review the final version and ideally recommend it to the City Council for final adoption in May or June. And at the same time that we bring the local hazard mitigation plan to planning, well, we're actually still trying to figure out this piece of the schedule. We're planning to bring the safety element sometime around the schedule. We're actually, as of today, working out some details with the state to determine the best schedule. But the final local hazard mitigation plan and safety element, the safety element, once adopted by council, will be incorporated into the general plan. That's the end of its journey. But then the local hazard mitigation plan will be sent to FEMA for final approval. And once we get the stamp of approval from FEMA, then we're eligible for the hazard mitigation grant funds. That's all I have for now. Jeff, do you have anything I missed?
I'll just, an acronym that this is an acronym-heavy field. Cal OES is the California Office of Emergency Services. And so they're the agency that reviews, they'll review both the local hazard mitigation plan, and there's a different state agency that reviews the safety element, and there's this complex interrelationship between the timing of those two that we haven't quite figured out. I'm not even sure that they know what they know that what they're doing to us.
We're setting up a call.
So anyhow, you'll see both of the documents. We need you to, in particular, review the safety element. That's a statutory requirement that you make a recommendation to the council. But in our view, at least, the far more meaningful document, more detailed document, is this local hazard mitigation plan. So that's why we're bringing it to you first tonight. So,
all right.
To answer any questions.
Yeah, are there questions from the commissioners? please go ahead.
Are we supposed to have read the whole thing and given you comments now? Because I did.
Yes.
Oh,
Well,
okay.
So but the way we usually structure the meetings is we'll do questions from commissioners, then we'll go to public comment, and then we'll come back for deliberation. If you have comments about, at that time, it would be appropriate to have comments about, this should change, or, this should be different, and that sort of thing. Does that make sense?
You'll guide me, I'm sure.
Okay, sure. So so right now, do you have any questions about the document for staff?
Well, I did read the document, and I wanted to ask some questions. There are about 7 questions. I don't know if that's okay? I don't want
Please
to
go ahead. Yeah.
hog the time. Okay. The first one was, why is the Veterans Memorial Building on the vulnerable facilities list? I mean, vulnerable as defined on page 10, and that's on page 11, facilities with structures that are particularly vulnerable to hazards, and by the nature of their operations, maybe with highly volatile, flammable, explosive, toxic, or other water-reactive materials. So I'm kind of curious why it's listed there.
I believe it's because it's not seismically retrofitted.
Yeah. That's my understanding as well.
Yeah, and it's owned by the county, actually. It's a county building on city land, but it's not a seismically safe building. I mean, it's marginally safe, I guess I would say.
Is there any hope that's going to get repaired, or that's not our business?
I would hope. There is not a near-term plan to do that. We should probably develop one with the county, but we don't have one on the books right now.
And no money. Okay, the second question, collaboration, it's on page 31, collaboration between residents, the city, and PG&E to electrify homes and decommission gas infrastructure will over time result in a decline in risk of earthquake-induced fires, which I understand there's a 24-inch pipe, whatever, that's bringing gas, or 12-inch. Anyway, I just wondered if the city has looked into fire risk of smart meters. There actually was in 2015 hundreds of PG&E smart meters that simultaneously exploded after a truck caused a power surge in Stockton.
We did not explore that, but we definitely can as part of this
Yeah.
update. And we did send the plan to PG&E, so they can review it as well, and perhaps they'll bring that up.
Okay.
I hope that they recalled those smart meters and they're no longer installing those.
Me too.
Yeah.
There's a lot of concern, indeed. All right, I have a bunch of typos I can just mail to somebody, but nevertheless, on page 37, the third paragraph, there's this paragraph that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me. It starts with misinformation about vaccines, the absence of a clear plan for coordination among federal agencies, such as the U.S. Agency for International Development and the Defense Department, and a need to improve public awareness about the threat posed by a biological outbreak are among the factors that make the possibility of large and deadly pandemics increasingly likely. Okay, and in addition, the risk of pandemic continues to be pushed forward as the anti-vaccine movement encourages parents to refuse vaccination of their children, resulting in higher risk of infection and dispersal of diseases. And I have the sense that if we're going to take a simplistic position on a controversial issue, then it must be carefully and accurately written with ample and credible evidence. I think pulling that paragraph would be my recommendation. And on page 38, the first paragraph, last sentence, the city has a web page on its site dedicated to COVID-19 response and mitigation and encourages vaccination of all city employees, staff, and residents. And I think this may not be appropriate as the COVID injections do not prevent transmission and infection. Therefore, it is somewhat controversial to be putting that in there. So I recommend pulling that sentence as well. And then on page 46, the last sentence of the first paragraph, it says here, even so, the city relies on energy as critical infrastructure for its activities and is actively encouraging Albany residents and businesses to electrify in order to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But we had a grid failure in August when people were charging their cars, and Governor Newsom says, just do that between 4 and 9 p.m. I think if we don't have sun and wind, the alternative sources may be missing, and our diversification of energy sources may seem prudent until the infrastructure such as transfer stations and transmission lines are in place.
So Commissioner Hudson, these are more along the lines of comments, which we can get back to.
Sorry.
No worries. So this is more time for just clarifications. If you saw something you didn't understand, then that would be a good time to ask that. And then after public comment, we'll come back and we'll give our comments.
Okay, then I'll just ask 2 more questions.
Sure.
Thank you very much for guiding me.
No worries. Thank you.
Okay. Let's see, I think on page 75, the second paragraph, 5th line, there's a statement that says, recently staff has arranged for the disposal of small amounts of hazardous materials that have been washed up on the Albany waterfront. And I don't know what that referred to, because the previously mentioned event was the 2007 Costco fuel oil leak, and following that mention was the 2011 diesel spill on the UC campus. So in between those 2 events, that sentence appeared, and I don't know what it refers to. So I'm wondering if you can tell me, or us.
I'm not actually sure, but we can look into that. I have a feeling that's a carryover from the previous plan. But we can see if there's information from the last planning process.
Okay. And then one last question. Has the city encouraged rainwater collection in allowing us to conserve water?
We promote webinars and resources from the Alameda County Clean Water Program that also does a lot of water conservation outreach, I would say. And so I imagine through doing that, water capture has come up. We haven't done our own city campaign. We typically defer to them for drought outreach, but I can see if we can track down information that we have shared or include reference to it in this plan.
As long as it's allowed. I don't know if each city has the provision to provide for a cistern and collect the water.
We follow the California Building Code and the various federal and regional code requirements for stormwater treatment.
Yeah.
It's not widely used in Albany, mainly because we have such small lots. It's difficult to really make it work. And the building code is very complex for those kinds of systems, but a few people have tried it. It's not widely used in Albany.
Could help. Yeah, okay, thank you for your, I'm done.
Sure. Any other questions from commissioners?
Yeah, just a super quick question. So I know this is an update. We've, previously adopted another version of this. Aside from the prioritization list of what's shifting where and, sub-bullets and some few additions, are there any other substantive changes that have been made from the previous adopted plan?
I have a red line version. I would say it's probably 40% different than the last plan, and that we've added more information, particularly with the public health epidemic
sure.
section. And also, if I look at the exact.
Wildfire, a lot more work on wildfire and evacuation protocols and procedures.
Yes.
So would it be a fair characterization to say basically it's the same plan as previous plus some few new topics that are more timely and
Yes.
relevant?
We did not take anything substantive out. We only added information.
Great. And then just to clarify one other point, sort of the point of this is to basically make ourselves eligible for funding.
Yes.
Great.
And to guide pre-disaster planning and mitigation efforts. But the reason we have a specific timeline is to be eligible for funding.
The statutory requirement is tied to funding.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And if I could, Commissioner Hudson, to answer your question about the waterfront, the Albany waterfront is a landfill. It's an old landfill. And so from time to time, there are materials that emerge out of the landfill that we investigate. And that's we do that pretty routinely, not all the time, but when these things pop up. So if there's any questions about the safety of those things that emerge, sometimes it's a plastic bag or a tire, other times it may have a creosote materials or something like that. They're investigated properly. And we go through the proper regulatory agencies to make sure that it's not a health risk to anyone.
Anything? Okay. Any questions?
I have one question.
Mm-hmm.
Page 15, four objectives, objective number 3. I don't really understand this one, and how this plan would protect Albany's uniform and values from being compromised. I don't really, what does that mean? What does it refer to? How is that, it just seems like too vague to me.
Too vague.
So I don't know if that needs either more specificity or eliminating.
Okay, that's definitely a carryover from the last plan. But if the commission thinks it's too vague or doesn't want to see it, we can remove it. I agree, it's more of a feel-good objective than like a, it doesn't, it's not similar to the other 3. I see your point.
It's like everything else is, very specific, fact-based, in general, action-oriented. So I just, maybe that could either be explained a little better, how this plan would affect those values or not, or what would be lost if something happened. I don't know. Or simpler just to eliminate it, maybe. But, I mean, that was the only question I had. It's like, what is that? And I'll have comments later.
Okay, and then my question, Commissioner Wadi already asked my question, my first question, which is what are the substantive changes? And then just a question about a couple of the maps, earthquake maps. And I know these maps weren't generated by staff, but it's always a problem for me when maps use colors, very similar colors to denote differences. So I'm looking at the first one is on page 23, the probabilistic seismic hazard assessment. Do you know which browns these are? So is it
Yes.
saying that we are mostly in violent shaking, MMI 9?
We're mostly in
Okay.
violent shaking. I can clarify that in the text.
Okay. Okay, great. All right, thank you for that. And then the second one is the liquefaction susceptibility on page 27. I think this is saying that a lot of our waterfront is very high. Okay. And then and then there's a kind of oval shape around Albany Hill. Is that low or very low?
I will clarify and put that in the text.
Okay.
I believe it's very low.
Yeah. Not that it matters that much, but I prefer that they use different colors. That would make it easier. Anywho. Okay, and that's all I had for questions for now. And we'll throw it out to public comment. There's no members in the audience here, and if anyone on Zoom wishes to comment, they should raise their hand now.
2 members with their hand raised. First is Elaine Stelton.
I wonder if any buildings in Albany are on landfill, and if so, if they're more vulnerable, particularly any buildings with lots of residents. Thanks so much. Good evening.
Okay, thank you for your question, and let's go to the next member first. Or next commenter.
Noah Kay.
Hi there. Just from looking at the old LHMP, the IT hazards section listed the largest, like the biggest risk as natural disasters. Does the city have any plan developed for ransomware, since municipal ransomware attacks have been substantially on the rise in recent years and could be a major detriment to city operations? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Is there anyone else online?
No other hands raised.
Okay, great. Could staff take those 2 questions?
Sure. I think for the first question regarding the landfill, I think the liquefaction susceptibility map that Chair Pilch, you were referring to a moment ago, that's a little, the gradation of the colors is a little tricky to pick up, but there are areas of landfill along the edge of the Albany waterfront, the bulb and the neck is landfill, but also along essentially along the Interstate 80 corridor and Cleveland Avenue and East Shore portions of that area are likely to be landfill. With respect to the second question, we do have an IT department that is tuned into the risks that cities are exposed to. The city of Oakland is going through it right now with a significant attack, and it's certainly not our area of expertise about what level of and what measures they're taking, but we are. I know the organization is aware of that, and we're taking those. We're constantly going through trainings and protocols and tests and so forth. So I think it's being taken seriously.
And we can definitely include information in the plan. I didn't think to add it, but it's a good addition.
It's a good comment that we should, that is a serious form of disaster.
Yeah. As a former software professional, I can say yes, yeah, that would be great to add that explicitly. Definitely still a major topic, a major concern. Great. Then if there's no other hands online, we can bring it back for deliberation from the council members. Commissioner Hudson, would you like to continue your comments?
I did get through all 7 of my substantial comments. There
Oh,
are
okay.
typos that want to clarify, if that's okay.
Okay.
Sorry.
So I think you might want to turn your mic on.
Thank you.
Yeah.
On page 53, third paragraph, second sentence, says, these requirements aim to maintain a defensible space free of combustible materials within a 30-foot zone around each home. Well, I have a 25 by 100-foot lot, so I don't think that's going to work. Might be a typo. 3-foot zone.
I think it's just that the key word is aim. Aim to maintain defensible space. That's what the industry standard is. And we will take what we can get.
Well, there goes my house. No, just kidding. But,
Yeah, that is interesting how that that industry standard might fit into a small community where the houses are packed together. Yeah. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
I think that's it. I can.
Okay.
What I'd like to do is I could just put these other typos onto a separate document and give them to you, Lizzie, or to you, Jeff.
To either one of us, if you want to leave it with us or have us copy it or whatever is most convenient for you, we'd be happy to.
I'll have to mail it to you because it's got everything else on it.
You can email it to me. I can give you my email address.
Perfect.
Great.
Thank you.
Great. Other commissioners have comments?
Sure, I have just a couple. I would say I've got 2 comments here. So first comment is as it relates to seismic, specifically page 28, 29, where it talks about one of the primary risks in Albany being soft story buildings and the fact that we have a pretty high volume of soft story buildings. And I would just suggest that maybe in the mitigation section we add a policy or sort of the next steps that the city should maybe consider land use controls that incentivize remediating that in some way, whether that is through I know a lot of cities have ADU programs to help incentivize and offset the cost of dealing with soft story situations, or whether that, in Albany, if folks do want to preserve their parking in those spaces, building them out with proper columns and support so that they're no longer a soft story. But whatever it is, maybe in the mitigation suggests that, Albany consider, land use and zoning programs to help solve that instead of it just saying, we'll make land use decisions, maybe we proactively develop a program to help target that. Because I do think those are certainly the most vulnerable buildings for even a somewhat modest earthquake. And I think what we've seen, in Turkey and in other places, that soft stories is where things fold. And a lot of those buildings, especially in Albany, if we think about sort of to our housing element conversation and concerns that folks have around tenants, a lot of our soft story buildings are our apartment buildings and where likely our more vulnerable populations do live. It's not so much of an issue, I think, for our single family home stock, but it is for our multifamily. So I just flag that as that might be something. I mean, I know we have a very, very long to-do list of action items from the housing element, so it may not be at the top, but it might just be worthwhile to incorporate that. And I'll just comment sort of in response to Commissioner Hudson's comments. I actually really disagree with the COVID comments. I think as drafted, it's very appropriate. I think we should, as a city, be taking our direction from public health officials who are experts in the field and who effectively rank above us on this commission as it relates to these topics. And I would like us to be deferential to county and state public health officials on their direction of best practice of how we as a local municipality who will receive state and federal funding should respond to those biological emergencies. Thanks.
Thank you. And I just want to note about the soft story about the seismic retrofits. You might want to talk to Councilmember Jordan, who has already referred to staff an item to create such a plan, a program, but I think it just hasn't been prioritized. As you note, we have many things we have to do, but I agree that that's an important one.
That's great to hear.
Yeah. Did you have comments?
Yeah, I have quite a few things, actually. Yeah, it was interesting, the natural hazards versus human-caused hazards, and I was going to mention cyber attacks or ransomware. That would be a big one. There's a lot that, they aren't just ransomware, they're just disabling attacks, and, I'm assuming the city has some preparation, but definitely should be in our planning.
Many cities have thought they were prepared and have not been, so.
Not, yeah. And then, just as far as human-caused hazards, I mean, it's not in here, but nuclear attack is something that, maybe it's too big for this, but it's definitely something that we could potentially.
Is that covered under the terrorism component, though, I would imagine?
Probably, could be. I mean.
Even if it's state-sponsored, it's still terrorism.
Yeah. And the other thought I had was mass shootings. I don't know what kind of protocols the city has for that, and unfortunately, it's something that seems to occur everywhere at almost any facility, anytime, and it's just a very sad fact of our lives, but, some mention of that or some idea of what would happen, because I can imagine it is incredibly disruptive to a community.
I think we had some reference to terrorism with respect to the Solano Stroll.
Right.
And not necessarily shootings.
And I've seen some, blocking the streets off. I think the Solano Stroll, one big hazard is vehicles that could enter and plow into people. And I think the city has put big trucks and barriers in the way. What happened in Nice 5 or 6 years ago was that there were no intermediate barriers either. So, something, and I think the city has been doing that at certain intersections. So, that's definitely something to think about. A lot of this, and I was telling Lizzie earlier, a lot of this is kind of climate change mitigation in some ways. So, eliminating gas lines, potentially decommissioning pipelines is, I think, a great thing. One way we could mitigate hazards would be to underground all our electrical and communication lines. And that would be a great thing to have happen, but I know it's very expensive. But if this is a long-range plan in some ways, then, maybe there's some way to.
Maybe when there's an opportunity.
Yeah, or, various streets, if there's a lot of street work happening.
Right.
It makes it much safer in an earthquake when the telephone poles and the power lines don't topple, So, it makes putting the grid back, the electrical grid back up much faster and less likely to go down in the first place. You know, and then we did receive one letter from Fred Neal. I think he's some sort of engineer who was commented before, and he was saying that EB Mud says that the water lines could rupture and be out for 6 weeks or something before being restored. So, and he mentioned like coordinating some sort of water distribution plan with with trucks or something. So, you know, it seems like something like that could be a good idea, or some sort of understanding of where that water would come from, how it would get here, how it would be distributed would be good. You know, I think in an earthquake, we could all be on our own more or less for 4 to 6 weeks if it's a really big one. So, you know, I guess encouraging people to keep supplies at home too. I think that's part of what we're doing. But if it's 6 weeks, you know, 10 gallons of water won't last that long, you know, so. My next point was, you know, in terms of mitigation, I guess it's secondary facilities. You know, I've been dealing a little bit with this, or a lot with the school district as a volunteer on their environmental action plan. But there hasn't been any discussion back and forth about using the schools as disaster relief centers or anything like that. There are cooking facilities at some campuses. I think the high school has a good kitchen, and sort of coordinating with the school district. My understanding was that when I was looking at the Marin rebuild project is that they are not building the schools to be complete disaster relief centers, because that's another level of construction. It's way beyond school, typical school construction. But most of those buildings will still be standing. There's a lot of open space around them. So that's probably where people would gather, or, you know, have temporary shelter. So maybe more coordination between the school district and the city would be helpful. And then the other thing, I think the city's doing it, looking at a battery backup for their own buildings, but I think we should be coordinating with the school district to get battery backup systems installed where we can, and maybe pooling the efforts or pooling the cost or something. I think Councilmember Mickey's mentioned this. So the other thing I was thinking about, you know, there's a lot about fire on Albany Hill. My bigger fear is that there's a big fire in the Berkeley Hills and winds blowing offshore, and it comes roaring down the hill at, you know, 20 miles an hour. And then, you know, that's kind of my bigger fear. So I was just wondering what the fire department has done for that kind of planning, and if there's some sort of interagency communications and operations that they're planning for. And, you know, that's an even faster disaster to evacuate from, potentially. So that's, for me, that's kind of the worst case evacuation scenario.
Yeah, I've heard the fire chief say exactly the same thing, that too is his greatest fear, that the
Yeah.
ember cast, which those embers can fly a couple of miles.
Right, and just the flames literally blow. I mean, 10 years ago, I wouldn't have really considered that a problem here or a hazard, but given the last 5 years where you've seen fires come down from the hills and just sweep through, you know, cities and take out 20, 30 blocks, you know. So, you know, just sort of, you know, has there been some mock disaster scenarios played out that the fire department could share with us or something?
We can check with them.
Or maybe some mention of that, and not just Albany Hill, but my biggest fear is the you know, some mass fire coming from the Berkeley Hills. Let's see, so floods don't seem like a major concern to me. I think Albany's flat and mostly drains out well enough. I mean, there would be localized flooding maybe at the creeks, but only if culverts or underpasses are blocked, I think. Then back to earthquakes, I think, yes, soft story is definitely the biggest threat to life safety, I think. And the biggest threat to building loss and complete building, it's more complete building failure is the problem there. Most houses will be standing, most will be habitable still, even though they will require a lot of repair. But soft story failure is catastrophic and completely devastating to the occupants. So that would be my priority for earthquake safety, was to adopt that soft story ordinance.
We could,
Yeah, you
if
saw
I
it
may
in
give you an update on that.
Okay.
Chair Pilch was absolutely right. Councilmember Jordan made this a priority in the strategic plan a couple of years ago. We have been working on it, and actually we had a study session on it last night before the regular council meeting. We've developed a program. We've hired a structural engineer to help us, and we've developed a program, the rough draft of a program. Council liked it last night, so we'll be kind of forming that into a formal ordinance that would call for an implementation of a program over the next 6 years. We can bring that to you so you can see the details of that as well.
Yeah.
I was going to ask is if that's something that we would take action on, or is it more building code, local amendments?
I'd be happy to have you take a look at it and take an action on it. It really is a building code. It's technical engineering analysis and remediation. So it's not a planning code amendment per se,
Got it.
but you're the advisory commission that's closest to that area of work. So happy to share it with
The
you.
only thing I would suggest on that is I think it would make a lot of sense to sort of move and groove and get something on the books, maybe in the building code phase, but it might be worthwhile to then do sort of a 2.0 that applies maybe a zoning overview or incentive program where we can maybe achieve some other, housing-related objectives, but maybe, have more of the carrot. The building code might be more the stick, and the planning ordinance version could maybe be a carrot to help incentivize people to make it pencil for existing buildings, yeah. But that sounds great.
Yeah, and then finally, there was a lot about smoke, heat, and cold, and those effects. And we really can deal with that in terms of building standards and adopting, it's definitely it's a REACH code, it would be a green REACH code, but looking at different building standards, there are a number of them out there. Passive House Institute standards are one of the main ones that come to my mind for higher insulation levels, air sealing, and mechanical ventilation systems that basically keep the houses cooler or warmer, keep them much more moderated, and you providing fresh air, continuous filtered fresh air. So that's one. Another one is just adopting LEED standards for multifamily. There's a Living Building Challenge 4.0. There's Architecture 2030 that all have similar goals in terms of energy reductions, energy use reductions, more livability, more habitability, more sustainability. So there are ways to address these other things, and if they apply to multifamily, then they're also applying to low-income residences, et cetera. So, I understand that the Passive House Institute standards for multifamily are really not that much more expensive than just building kind of to code these days, because you're getting energy use reductions, equipment sizes are being reduced. So you put more money into the insulation and air sealing, and less has to go into the equipment costs. So there's trade-offs there. And so it's something I think we could look at, and I know the Climate Action Committee has looked at these things, but we've never really gotten into it in a serious way in terms of looking at cost-benefit analysis or, kind of adopting any of these. And some municipalities have adopted a number of these, especially LEED. So there are ways to deal with a lot of these things in the planning and building code. So, but it would be a REACH code, I think, because the actual building code doesn't go that far yet, and it may, but it's not there yet. So, that's about all I have for now. But I would really like to look at more green building standards going forward. So I think that's it. I'm fine with the pandemic language, all that, et cetera.
Okay, and finally, let's see, yeah, I think we should make sure we reference the current efforts on soft story retrofits in the plan. So I think we've made that clear, and I agree with Commissioner Wadi that, and I was imagining that such a program would both be carrot and stick. If we don't have carrots, there'll still be a lot of buildings out there that won't be addressed. So hopefully, I don't know if you got similar feedback from the council, but I certainly would be glad to give similar feedback to the council that's needed as well. I thought everyone's comments were, all my fellow commissioners' comments were great. I think nuclear attack should be referenced at least a little bit. Mass shooting, definitely. I mean, that doesn't seem to be any stop and seems to be increasing. So, what the city might do in the event of a mass shooting. And then, we are already trying to electrify. We already do have programs to try to electrify, which is great. And so that will mean less gas use or less need for gas and, no gas lines in new construction perhaps, but perhaps referencing that we need to have a way to shut down the old gas lines, or a plan to shut down the old gas lines, and so they don't, so that they actually don't have gas in them anymore. And I know that Councilmember Jordan again has been thinking about the how you need to. Gas lines branch out in a tree, and you need to, in order to get rid of the gas lines, you have to work on the nodes and the ends of the lines, which will be the buildings, and then start to prune the tree back so that you remove more and more lines from service. Anyway, referencing removal of the gas lines, I think would be great. I already mentioned ransomware should be addressed. And then finally, I agree that I think that the COVID and vaccine language is fine as is, and then I agree with Commissioner Wadi's comments on that. And I think that's it for me. Any other thoughts or discussion on this from commissioners? Yes.
Was I to understand that there are not kitchens in schools now?
Not every school has a kitchen. Cornell had one that's been decommissioned, I think. I think it's the high school that has the main kitchen. Some of them have spaces that were kitchens. The Veterans Hall has a kitchen.
Yeah, they do.
So I think all the food preparation takes place in one place at the high school, and then it's distributed. But they do have cafeterias. They all have cafeterias. Most of them have cafeterias, I think. I think they all have cafeterias.
Well,
Schools have been changed since I was in them.
the middle school has an outdoor eating area.
Right, or a cafeteria in the sense of just food serving, not food prep. So they bring.
I know the middle school used to have like a food prep area by the auditorium. I worked in it when I was in middle school.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm very familiar.
All right.
But again, things have changed. There have been some remodeling of all the buildings.
Well, as a disaster relief center, I was just thinking how hard that might be if you don't have food prep areas.
Yeah, they don't all have food, like cooking facilities. They don't all have cooking facilities. So.
Okay. So I think that, did you get what you needed from the commission? So it sounds like yes.
Yeah, my only last thought would be with the Veterans Hall, that would be a good one to try to preserve in terms of earthquake safety. I'm sure it's quite vulnerable to failure.
It's been a number of years, I think, since anyone has taken a detailed look at it, but I believe, a decade or more ago, there was an analysis done, and it was quite expensive to retrofit. And it was just a choice of where do we put our money. And I think at the time we were talking about retrofitting, or not investing in the parks, and it was felt that that was a higher priority. This is probably 10, 12 years ago.
It might be worth revisiting some sort of ballpark estimate for that, see if maybe there would be funds somewhere, but.
Since I've been involved in city government almost 20 years, this has been talked about almost every single one of those years. And the conclusion usually is that the city, it's too large a thing for the city to take on. And but it would be a wonderful building to retrofit and have for city use. I think there's been general agreement for that. But how to get there, there isn't any. No one has come up with a.
It's a county building, so
Yeah.
the county should pay for it.
Right. And so as far as I've seen, the county also has a lot of stuff to do, and they have not stepped up in this way
Okay.
either. So, but I agree with you.
Priorities in life safety, I guess, and disaster preparation, and another secondary facility that could be a disaster relief center,
It's a good comment.
so.
Yeah.
With that, there might be federal funds that are associated with, making a building, survivable
Yeah.
for an emergency. So it may, if it was beyond just seismic retrofitting, but seismic retrofitting as part of a, emergency operation backup facility, it may just open up opportunities for funding that don't currently exist. So
Worth
I'm sure there's a lot of people competing for those funds right now, but.
Right.
Yeah, but maybe there are more funds coming. I mean, we have to deal with disasters more and more, so maybe there are will be more sources of that funding in the future. I've always thought it'd be great if there were a Friends of Veterans Memorial Building formed that could start soliciting maybe private donations in that area. But anyway, yeah.
We're probably talking $20 million or something.
It was in the multi-million dollars. I don't remember what the dollar amount was.
Probably more like that now, yeah. The figure I heard was 10 million, but that was way back when, so, yeah.
Well, I think we got very
Great
valuable feedback. We'll
Great.
incorporate this as best we can into the next draft the council will see, and then they'll give us similar feedback, I imagine. And you'll see this again in May-ish, probably.
What did we say? April or May? I think May. Yes, around May.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for coming and presenting, and we'll look forward to the revisions.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. Okay, moving on to new business then. Item 8.1, the Planning Commission Chair and Vice Chair reorganization. Did staff have a presentation, or is it pretty self-explanatory what's written here?
I think this is self-explanatory.
Okay. All right.
It's
Very good.
usually mechanically the best way this works is to select a chair first, and then from there select a vice chair.
Okay. Well,
Question though, like with Commissioner Moman not being here, would it make sense at all to postpone it a week so we have a full commission to vote?
that certainly would be a nice thing to do, I think.
I was just thinking in the context that he hasn't been, nominated or in that opportunity, so just not to,
I'm
unless there's urgency in taking care of it
There's no
today.
urgency at all.
Yeah.
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
And it's probably better not to appoint him a role without.
That was kind of my thought.
Well, that too, yes, yeah. Okay, if the rest of the commission is amenable to that.
I'm happy to maybe move item 8-1 to March 8th, or our next hearing.
Okay. Do you need a formal motion for that, or can we just say either?
I
Okay.
catch the direction that you're giving, yeah.
Okay, so that I think we're agreed on that direction as a commission, so we'll go ahead and do that. Then that concludes our business. Our next meeting is March 8th at 7 p.m. And thanks, everybody, and we are adjourned.
Okay.
Thank you very much.